Hello, and welcome to Texas Holocaust Remembrance Week 2021. My name is Nami Echelov, and I'm the Holocaust Memorial Museum of San Antonio's director, as well as the interim CEO for the Jewish Federation of San Antonio. We want to thank you for joining us for this special program, as well as to thank the Texas Holocaust and Genocide Commission for underwriting all the production costs associated. In case you'd like to see any of our other programs or other resources available put forth by the museum, please make sure to check out the Holocaust Memorial Museum's website at hmmsa.org. And now for our program.
Hello, my name is Julie Tzucker, and I'm the Director of Jewish Engagement and Learning at the Holocaust Memorial Museum of San Antonio, which is a program of the Jewish Federation of San Antonio. And I'm excited to be with you today to talk about an incredible figure, a man named Emmanuel Ringelblum. He started an organization called Oinig Shabbos, and this is the original spelling, and it is a Yiddish term. Let me tell you a little bit more about it. Basically, it's a celebration of the Sabbath, and it was a clandestine, secret organization. He decided, he saw what was going on around him, and he was going to make his history known. He said, I'm writing a shout to the world. We are going to write our history. Usually the one who wins in the end is the one who writes the history books. And he did not know in 1939 who was going to win. Let's explore the story of Emmanuel Ringelblum. For your Texas Holocaust Remembrance Week, we are talking about unpacking Elie Wiesel's quote, "The opposite of love isn't hate. It's indifference." Indifference is when you just don't care. You walk by, it doesn't matter, you're an onlooker, a bystander. And the people involved knew, at least the Jewish people knew, that they needed to do something. There was resistance every single step of the way. And there are different forms of resistance. Intellectual resistance, and that's an example of Emmanuel Ringelblum's Oinig Shabbos group. Armed resistance, spiritual resistance, diplomatic resistance, and there were also people who were willing to rescue others. They were upstanders, people who said something and stood up. It is very difficult to be one of those people in a situation like this. People did not know exactly what was going on around them. So let's set the stage. We're in Germany in the 1930s. This group has taken power. They're called the Nazi Party. They're a National Socialist German Workers' Party. And people are in desperate times. After World War I, there was incredible poverty. There was desperation. There was the Treaty of Versailles, where Germany was blamed for all the problems that happened in World War I. And people felt it was unfair, and they were really unhappy about that within Germany. And when this guy Hitler came along and he made them feel special and important again, and he promised to make things better. He promised everyone would have food and a job, and they would be proud to be German again. He also did that at a cost. He told them who to hate and who to blame for all their problems. That was not the correct way of going about this. We know today you can solve international and domestic problems with politics without having a scapegoat, without blaming one certain group, and without having one savior, one person to save you. Though we would argue thousands and thousands of people propped up the Nazi Party and Adolf Hitler, it was not just this one person who caused this problem. And it was not just one person who allowed everything to happen. Everyone decided together that this was allowed to happen. And by this, I mean the Holocaust, the systematic state-sponsored persecution and murder of the Jewish people, about 6 million out of 9 million. So that's about 2/3 of the Jews of Europe. And there were other targeted groups as well. So Emmanuel Ringelblum was in Warsaw, which is not in Germany, it is in Poland. And he saw what was happening. Concentration camps were being built. There was a Jewish boycott, meaning the Nazi Party decided, we're going to boycott some of these stores that are owned by Jewish people. And it was actually a failure, but people outside the country and inside Germany could see the building propaganda, the blaming without any evidence whatsoever of this group of people, this minority group within Germany. In 1935, they started the Nuremberg laws. And this is really scary because the Holocaust was legal. They took the citizenship away from people and they took rights away from people. Right here you can see a woman on a bench that is only for Jews. And this is segregation. Segregation was happening in Nazi Germany. People were seeing it. They were forced to stamp their passports with J so that people knew their religion. And that meant they were no longer citizens of the Reich, as they called it at that time. They had to take a middle name, Israel, Sarah. These are just a few examples of the things that were going on. There were also massive book burnings. There were censorship along with this propaganda. There were attacks. Kristallnacht, the November pogrom in November 9th of 1938, this whole weekend of what the Nazis called riots. But they weren't riots and they were not spontaneous. This was actually a planned attack, and they told the police and the firefighters to stand by and to do nothing. Can you imagine a group of government leaders going around and lighting religious institutions on fire, ransacking people's homes and businesses, destroying them, and then they made the people, the victims, pay for this damage? It was an incredibly shocking, violent weekend. And the world knew. It was in the newspapers, and Emmanuel Ringelblum is in the next country over in Poland, and he's seeing what's happening. Now, on September 1st, 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland. And it was an easy victory for them. They only fought for about a month, and then they won. And many Polish people actually welcomed them in. It really was not very difficult for them at all. And by September 28, Hitler's army had won. And certain things started to happen immediately. Within about a month, the Jewish people noticed they were being locked down, there were restrictions, their lives had changed almost overnight. Imagine this, 50 to possibly up to 100,000 Polish children who had this look, this blonde hair, blue eye, Aryan look of the German. They were actually kidnapped and taken into German homes. They were trying to have as many children for the next generation of their master race as they could. Now, we know today biologically this is complete nonsense. It's pseudoscience or fake science. And when I do this, I mean fake. So we look at what was happening, we see this fake science, the blaming of the Jews. The Nazis invade Poland, and all the time this man is watching, and he's seeing what's going on. There are about 1.8 million Jews in Western Poland. That's a much, much larger population than Germany. And so they saw their lives just changing completely overnight for the worse. By June 1941, Germany also conquered Eastern Poland. So at first it was divided, and then they got all of Poland. So Dr. Emmanuel Ringelblum, he was actually pretty young at this time. He was in his 30s, and he had a PhD in history. He went to the University of Warsaw. He had graduated in 1927, so he was trained in this. And that's why he was able to organize the Oyning Shabbos group, was because he was a historian. He saw what was happening around him, and his form of resistance was to document what was happening. He was actually in Switzerland when World War II broke out. He could have escaped, but he felt a calling to his home, and he wrote, "The decision to return to Poland is a matter of civic duty." He felt he could not abandon his home in its darkest hour. He was determined to resist the Nazis. He also, in addition to the documentation, he ran soup kitchens. A lot of people don't know there was flourishing community inside the ghettos. People thought that was the last stop. They didn't realize until later that these concentration camps and killing centers would be the end of so many people's lives. They thought, we have to make the best of the ghettos. And they were forced into these really small land areas. It was something like 30% of the population of Warsaw was forced into 2 to 3% of the land area. So as you can imagine, It was really overpopulated. There was disease, there was starvation, and the Nazis were doing these things on purpose. They wanted Jewish people to die. They wanted them to get disease, partially to prove their fake science and show that they were degenerate as a group, but also just to kill people and to have less of them, because this was their desire, was to have a world without Jewish people, which goes against American values and the values of understanding and caring about others, which is what we want you to understand from this. Don't take this horrible situation the wrong way. Think about it as your chance to develop empathy, to learn about others, and see what you could do if a situation like this comes up, because we never want this kind of thing to happen again. There was another person in his group who said she wanted to cast a stone under the wheel of history. So think about that. Cast a stone under a wheel. So that's like either stopping it, maybe causing it to flip over. There was some way that they could interfere with what the Nazis were doing, and they were going to do it. So Ringelblum was convinced that this story of Jewish suffering was universal. So as I say, we want you to consider what other people are feeling and how and why and what's going on in situations. Be willing to stand up, be willing to resist if we see signs of genocide happening. Why bother? Why document? He's in this horrible situation. People are dying around him. There's 6 to 15 people in a room in the Warsaw Ghetto. As I said before, there's starvation, disease, overpopulation. 284 calories on average given to them by the Nazis. Now this isn't just like having a granola bar and that's it for the entire day. So especially for growing children, this was a very difficult starvation situation. Take a look at some of these pictures. We have overcrowding here. Here's examples of people who just a few months before had good lives. They had businesses, they had jobs, they had apartments. They maybe were farmers, and suddenly they're all forced into this situation together. Many are not allowed to work. They had to have special passports and permission in order to work, which was another part of the Nazi plan. Here we see the armbands. Look at this poor soul, just starving, destitute on the street because he has no way to earn money to buy food. Maybe his parents have died. People on the streets begging, emaciated, desperate. So as he sees all of this, Emmanuel says, let's get some people together. Let's gather as many documents as we can. They actually gathered over 6,000 documents, which is around 35,000 pages. And there are 60 or so people who contributed. We don't know all of them. And of all the contributors, only 3 people survived. Rachel Auerbach, this is her. She was a journalist and she ran the Warsaw Ghetto soup kitchen. Hirsch Wasser, this is the secretary, and Bluma Wasser, this is Hirsch's wife, and she was also an assistant in this group. Luckily, Rachel knew where they buried. If you look at this, this is an old milk crate, and here this is an old metal box that they would use for filing. And so they had 2 milk crates and one of those metal boxes, and they buried them under the Warsaw Ghetto. And they were just hoping that somewhere in the future someone would read these documents, remember who they were, remember their names, their stories, and give them a chance to write their history. September 1946, this is after the war is over. They found clay boxes, clay covered, because of the land area. Many of them were water damaged, but the war is over. This is the outcome that Emmanuel had hoped for. He was really hoping that people would see these documents. And 2 additional milk cans were found in the cellar of a ruined house. There is still one out there, one burial site of documents that has not been found, and they're using new technology, sonar and whatnot, to try and figure out where under Warsaw it is. But the whole area was bombed out and completely rebuilt. And so you have to look at the old address and, where was it? And they've never found it. But one of these days, we're going to have a 3rd batch of documentation coming out, the final Oinig Shabbos historical documents. And that's going to be a really exciting day. Ordinary items were in these, as well as people's diaries and food coupons, wrappers. I love this, chocolate wrappers. I bet some kids put that in there. They loved chocolate back then, and just as we do now. So these are just regular people having regular lives, except the Nazis, their government completely changed on them overnight, and they just wanted to live their lives like anyone else, and they couldn't go about it. So it's like making a time capsule. If you've ever made a time capsule and buried it and you think, I'm going to find this 5 years later, except they're doing this knowing they're probably not going to be alive because the situation is so desperate around them. So the archive provides insight on the daily lives, the struggles, the sufferings of the people during the Holocaust. So a lot was lost. They called the Great Deportation from the Warsaw Ghetto to Treblinka extermination camp, which was the most common destination out of the Warsaw Ghetto. People were liquidated, as they called it. The Nazis used a lot of euphemisms or words to hide what they were doing. And liquidation is, it's like something when your business is going you're out of business and you're selling everything. You're emptying out. But really what they were doing is bringing people to their death, to murder them in very painful ways. So during this time, they buried it under the floor of the ghettos. It was Hirsch Wasser who actually knew where they were buried. It was not Rachel. So he knew where they were buried, and luckily they survived the bombing. Imagine that. So the whole city was basically bombed out. There are very few original buildings left in Warsaw, and they buried them deep enough that they survived. It's a miracle, incredible. And the archives were possibly the ones that I said that are still there and they're looking for, possibly under the Chinese embassy, but they have not found them there. So the retrieval of the archives, quote from Hirschwasser, "It must be all recorded, not with a single fact omitted. And when the time comes, as it surely will, let the world read and know what the murderers have done." This is the Warsaw Ghetto. You can see part of the wall. This is from the archives. All the following slides are from the archives. These are original documents that I'm going to share with you. I actually went to a museum in Warsaw where they have these on display, and it was an incredibly emotional experience. And I hope that you will remember their names and their stories after reading these. Gustava Eureka wrote, "To write was to assert precious individuality, even on the brink of death. To write was to read, if only to bring the killers to justice. To write was to complete the defeat of the killers by ensuring that future historians would use the victims' cries to change the world." To write was to resist. Have you ever heard the saying, the tongue is mightier than the sword? The pen is mightier than the sword as well. We can use our voices and cry out, whether it's now or later, someone will read it. I think what they did is better than violence, though there are people who did armed resistance, and that's important, it has its place too, but to actually write feelings and facts about what happened is just incredibly prescient, meaning thinking about the future and what might happen later. And here we are in 2020, 80-something years later, 70, 80 years later, looking at these documents. So Gustava worked for it was called the Judenrat, which is a leadership group within the ghetto. It's like a council. And she copied documents for Oneg Shabbos, and she wrote the last stage of deportation as death, meaning they originally thought they were just being moved, displaced, which isn't right either. But I don't think that the world imagined that Nazis would kill millions of people. Israel Lichtenstein, the man who was responsible for burying the archives with two of his students, he was a teacher. This is something that he wrote. I do not ask for any thanks, for any memorial, for any praise. I only wish to be remembered. So let's take a moment and look at his face. Think of his name. Moment of silence in memory of this teacher. I'm thankful to him. Maybe he didn't want gratitude, but I'm thankful for him. Nachum Griswatch. This is his last archive entry. He heard that his parents' building was being blockaded by the Nazis. And he wrote, I am going to run to my parents and see if they are all right. I don't know what's going to happen to me. Remember, my name is Nachum Griswatch. Let's remember his name. Menachem Mendel Cohen was killed during the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. And by the way, all the people that have contributed that I'm writing about, just those three that I mentioned survived. So all these people were murdered by the Nazis for no reason at all except power and greed. Cohen was killed during the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. He was a wealthy merchant, and he was able to actually support the organization financially, which means he could help feed people. He wrote a journal during the Great Deportation when 300,000 Jews went to Treblinka in the summer of 1942. He wrote, the wild beastliness that the murders have shown us is beyond imagination, beyond description. It's very hard to write when you're still in the middle of a nightmare, when wild animals are chasing you to tear you to pieces with machine guns or suffocate you with gas. I'll try, though, so that the wide world reads about this and knows how to avenge those bloodthirsty sadists for everything they've done to us, the Polish Jews in Poland and especially in Warsaw. Menachem Mendel Cohen. Look at the desperation of this letter. Do you see these exclamation marks? The underlining? This may not be a language that we can understand, but surely you have written or thought about. Maybe you've typed 10 exclamation marks, and what you have is an emergency situation. And sometimes we're not always as tactful or as kind as we need to be in an emergency situation. But look at the passion with which this man writes. This is sent by a man who is named Isaac Spillman, and he is from the town of Plock, and he'd been expelled to another town nearby. This is March 2nd, 1941. I'm writing this letter 2 days after arriving. I am in Zarki Radomsko district, 40 kilometers from Czestochowa. I am here with my mother. We have no roof over our heads. We have no clothes or money. Please appeal to the people of Plock to urgently help us in any way they can, because we are dying of starvation and the cold. I plead for help. I plead for help. We were expelled on February 20th, and we were in Jezaldovo camp for about 6 days. We arrived here February 28th. We are in a miserable situation. Urgent help needed. Isaac Spillman and his mother. This is the transcript of a radio program. One form of resistance was through broadcasting. Members of the Oneg Shabbos heard the British Broadcasting Radio declare that Nazis have murdered at least 700,000 Jewish people. This is years before the killing would end. This is June 1942. They call for punishment of these war crimes. This is a good day for the Oyneg Shabbos. It brings hope, yet the great deportation to Treblinka extermination camp was to begin only a month later. This is before 300,000 people are sent to the camps for murder. 700,000, and the world knows, and it goes on for years. The United States and the Allies decided not to bomb extermination camps and not to do these, and there were political reasons for this and justifications. But in hindsight is 2020. When we look at history, we have to think, what was the right thing to do? What would we do now? But we need to put this into context and really think about, why did the world know and nothing was happening? Without putting too much judgment and our 2020 vision, 2021 vision and lens on these documents, let's think about history. Why would they have bombed? Why would they not have bombed? Why did so many hundreds of thousands, millions more people have to die before the world would demand that this stop? So this is a water-damaged piece right here, but it is still legible. The people who preserved this document can still read this, and it is written in Yiddish from, and I hope I'm saying his name correctly, Perek Opochinski's diary. At night, the smuggling is carried out over the roofs of the houses, through narrow holes, through cellars, and even throughout the wall of the ghetto itself. Through the wall of the ghetto itself. Imagine that. In short, every possible way. Who knows if someday a memorial will not be put up in memory of the smuggler for having risked his life? Because in retrospect, we know that he or she, I'm going to add that part, because there were female smugglers, thus saved a large part of Warsaw's Jews from death by starvation. So this form of documentation, which is resistance, is actually documenting another form of resistance, which is the smuggler. And when people are desperate and they're being starved out, they will do what it takes to survive. Let's take a close look at this document. This is a registration card for a man named Rabbi Shimon Huberband. He lived from 1909 to 1942, so he was much younger than me when he was murdered. He was a historian and a rabbi at the start of the war. So Rabbi Huberband fled from Pietrokov Trybunalski, which is southwest of Warsaw, to nearby Sulejav, where his wife and son were killed in a German bombing raid. In early 1940, he met Ringelblum. Imagine how he must have felt. His wife and his child were killed. So do you think a man like that would be willing to resist? How might he have been feeling when he met Ringelblum? He knew him through his work in what's called YIVO, and you can look that up if you're interested, in Warsaw's office. He was appointed head of the religious department of the Jewish Self-Help Network, and was a central figure on the Oyneg Shabbos staff. So the self-help, that has to do with the soup kitchens and whatnot, because they were not getting help from the outside, and so they did everything they could to help each other within this community. As well as documenting religious life. So even having a religious life was also a form of resistance. During the war, he researched many other topics. Rabbi Huberband and his second wife were murdered in Treblinka in August 1942. He remarried, and then they were both murdered shortly thereafter. Let's take a look at this document. Notice here, looks like it had some water damage, a line where it was folded. And this is, so the lettering, the Hebrew letters are the same letters that are in Yiddish. It's very similar looking. This is from the writings of Rabbi Huberband. He wrote, "In wartime, a person allows himself many things that he would ask the rabbi about in peacetime. But in fact, these days there is hardly anything to ask about. There is no slaughter of cows or chickens. There is scarcely any milk or meat in the homes of the Jews of the ghettos. On the other hand, there are questions that are specific to wartime. Should one hold a Seder on Passover Eve when there is no wine for the 4 cups, no matzot? Are the weak and the ill permitted to eat on Yom Kippur? Are the sick permitted to desecrate the Sabbath? Can the weak and ill eat meat that is not ritually slaughtered? Because kosher meat is hard to find and also costs a great deal of money. Some of this may not mean anything to you if you don't know about Judaism. But what he's basically saying here is, it is very difficult to follow the laws of my religion during this time. Judaism has laws around what you can eat, how the animals are treated, how they are killed in order to get the meat from them. And these people are starving. They're just trying to survive. The Sabbath, you're not supposed to work on what we call Shabbat, which is Sabbath, Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. But are they even able to do this? Should they just keep doing everything they can and not worrying about the religious laws during this? He calls it wartime, but I want to be clear. Genocide generally happens under the cover of war. So World War II was happening, and Germany was trying to take over a lot of land and become an empire. But this genocide, this murder of millions of people, that was happening at the same time, and the Nazis were profiting off it. They were having slave labor, stealing everything they possibly could from these people, down to their hair, the gold in their teeth, even using their ashes to pave roads and other things. So, can a person really live their ideal religious life during wartime? How is this possible? How difficult must this have been for a religious leader? So this is a newspaper. And this was the official newspaper, but they had many underground or secret newspapers. And that was another form of resistance. So this is called Gazeta Zidoska, an official newspaper of Jewish affairs. And it was published by the occupying authority. They called it the Generalgouvernement, and that is the Nazi authority from 1940 to 1942. So, like I said before, people thought they were staying in the ghettos. They thought that was it, or maybe another relocation. And they had newspapers, they had restaurants, they had theaters, they had community, they had schools inside the ghettos. And this is just one of the documents. So, a little bit more about the Generalgouvernement, what they called it. It means general government, and this is a unit, territory in central Poland, and it had its own government administration. It was generally a Jewish area, and they were semi-independent from the Nazis, but they intended to use this as a place to do their racial dirty work. So murdering people, they called it a racial dumping ground. They had an endless supply of slave labor and ultimately the mass murder of European Jewish people. They did a lot of terrible things in this area. This is one of the underground news. So, have you ever seen a political cartoon? Or this is kind of like a meme from the 40s. So we look at this, see this watchtower? This is barbed wire being broken. This is the wall. So this is a form of resistance. They called themselves the National Kibbutz, the movement of the ghetto. Now, a kibbutz is today something totally different. It is like a co-op, a place where people go and they farm together and they live together. In Israel, you could go and live on a kibbutz for a while and contribute and farm with them. However, this is something a little bit different. It's a co-op in a different way. This is also part of the youth group movement. So youth were a huge part of the resistance. The youth, I believe, we underestimate teenagers and young people. I believe that they are incredibly capable. And some of the most important resistors during the Holocaust were teenagers. They were fearless, pretty incredible. Or they were brave because they resisted even though they were afraid. And that's, to me, the definition of bravery. So this right here is from Emmanuel Ringelblum's diary. and he is the organizer of the Oneg Shabbos. This is March 18, 1941. Quote, "The future historian will have to devote a fitting page to the Jewish woman in the war. She will fill an important page in Jewish history for her courage and resilience. Thanks to her, thousands of families managed to survive the horror of these days. Recently, an interesting phenomenon has taken place. In some of the House committees, women have taken the place of the men who have abandoned their tasks, tired and exhausted by their work. On some of these committees, the entire management is composed of women." Now, this is 1941, almost 80 years ago. And we have to consider roles were different, gender roles were different then. Some of these things are still happening now, but it was very much the men do this, the women do this, but the women also stepped up. It's pretty incredible what we're seeing here. Teenagers resisting, women stepping up to change and the world and do their very best to survive in such a difficult situation. This document is about the typhus fight. Now, typhus is a disease that is still around, and it only happens in areas where people are really suffering. There's tons of poverty, and they're living in horrible, deplorable conditions. This is from August 26, 1941. Quote, "A conspicuous apathy is apparent towards death," meaning people are just, he notices that people don't care. A conspicuous apathy, they're just kind of going along their day. Sometimes they would walk in the street and step over a corpse. "A conspicuous apathy is apparent towards death, which doesn't seem to make an impression or impact anymore. People walk indifferently past corpses. Only rarely does anyone ask in the hospitals about the condition of their relatives. In addition to famine, the typhus epidemic is the most important preoccupation for the Jewish public. The typhus curve is constantly on the rise. For example, now in mid-August, there were 6,000 to 7,000 sick people in apartments and about 900 in hospitals. The disproportion between the number of patients in hospitals and the number in private homes is explained by the fact that hospitals, for 1,000 reasons, have lost their medical character and have turned into houses of death." So consider for a moment, why would a person stop caring about death around them? What must their life be like if all these dying people seem to have no effect, or they stop asking? For 1,000 reasons, hospitals have lost their medical character and turned into houses of death. So people can't really go to the hospital for treatment, is what he's saying, right? Imagine people dying around you, and disease is so terrible, a person just succumbs, they just die, and there's not much we can do. So right here, we have an announcement. It refers to an order that has been given to resettle. And this is what I've been talking about, relocation, resettlement. It says, Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto were, or says are, but this is past tense, were urged to report on the 29th through the 31st of July 1942, voluntarily to the Umschlagplatz. This is the assembly point at the train. And they're promised 3 kilograms of bread and 1 kilogram of marmalade. This is an unbelievable amount of food, a luxury to starving people. So think about it. I talked about the Nazis use euphemisms. They trick people. They lied every step of the way. Truth was hard to find in those days. Would you go if you were starving? Could you even imagine? How do we know what we would do? Would we go to the train and ultimately what is to our death and just believe that we are being relocated? It's impossible to know what we would do. And would we even know? So this is a large-scale operation. This is called the the final solution. So the Nazis did not know exactly what they were aiming for in the 30s, but by the summer of 1942, the final solution is their decision that they're going to kill every single Jewish person in the world, basically, because they believe they're going to take over the world. So they were going to be Judenfrei, free of Jews, and tell people they were relocating them, when actually most of the time they were going to be murdering them or causing them to do slave labor that was so difficult that they died from it pretty quickly, within a couple of months. So the resistance, the people who were fighting against the Nazis, told people, don't fall for this, don't do it. They already discovered that the trains went directly to Treblinka. However, 15,000 people showed up to board these trains. That's how desperate. 15,000 people, even though they were being told, this is a trick. They still showed up and they boarded the trains. During the next couple of months, the Jewish ghetto police directed another 250,000 people onto trains to Treblinka, where they were put into fake showers and they were gassed to death, which was a very difficult and painful way to die, and scary. They panicked. Another about 50,000 residents were killed during the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. This is the last will and testament. A man named David Graver from August 3rd, 1942, only 19 years old, and he knows he's going to his death. He was a member of the left Poli Zion, so there were a lot of different political groups then. The Nazis were afraid of communism and trade unionists, and there were people who believed in those things then. And 1932, the Nazi Party was elected. The Hitler and the Nazis did not force their way in, but they were really good at the propaganda against these different political groups. Anyway, so this is one of the students of Israel Lichtenstein who said he didn't want any thanks, he just wanted to be remembered. And his friend was Nachum Griswatch, who went to check on his parents. And they helped bury the first archive under what was called the Ber Baruch School. They buried their last wills with the archive. Look at this. See a child's drawing here? This looks like the table at Shabbat, which is the Friday night Sabbath, candlesticks, food, maybe mom lighting the candles, maybe dad cutting some food for everyone, lots of flowers. You see some Hebrew letters here. This is a student's schedule of classes when you look at and translate the Hebrew. Kids are kids, right? Doodling, making it pretty. How many of you have doodled on your papers? This child's last doodles ended up being the end of their life. So Ringelblum, on March 1943, he escaped and went into hiding in a non-Jewish area of Warsaw. He did return to the ghetto, though, during an uprising. So this is the second chance for him to escape and to survive, and he goes back into the ghetto. He was deported to a labor camp after that, but he escaped again with a Polish man and a Jewish woman. They, however, had a hideout, and they were discovered by the Polish police on 7th of March 1944, and he was shot to death. He and his family and the other Jews he had been hiding with were all murdered in the ruins of the ghetto. Think about all the chances he had to escape, and he ended up being killed by the Nazis. Here's our bibliography. It's always important to know where your sources are. If you ever have the chance to go to Warsaw, I highly recommend going to the Jewish Historical Institute, where these documents will be forever enshrined in history. Thank you so much for your attention today. Please let us know if you have questions. Go to hmmsa.org, visit the museum, keep learning, keep growing, and take good care.